It feels weird to me that the next generation of die-hard Scottish rugby fans won't grow up watching this try on a cheap rugby VHS tape fronted by a former international in a winter coat, or a dodgy DVD transfer of the 101 great Scottish tries with no music on the menus. Saturday, just gone, gave us one of the most instantly iconic scores rugby has seen since Cheslin Kolbe crossed in the World Cup final, a try destined to be seen thousands of times by millions of people, contributing to a result celebrated worldwide in a way not possible in those days of DVDs. Scotland stretched their unbroken streak at Twickenham to 6 years, and Finn Russell's unbeaten record against the old enemy to 6 games, as Scotland won at Twickenham by 6 points, thanks to some heroic performances across the side and 2 unbelievable tries from the man simply known as Dewey. So, how did Scotland pull it off? What did we learn about Steve Borthwick's plans for England? Was it just a satanic result? And is this going to be a false dawn? That question applies to both sides. There was something different about Scotland on Saturday. The glorious Finsanity remained, but there was a calm maturity in how they approached not just the final quarter, but the entire game. Not normally seen outside of Murrayfield. Learning how to win is the most important skill in rugby, particularly international rugby, and this Scotland team just seemed to have that knack. And a lot of that came down to their knack for always securing points. Scotland averaged 4.1 points per visit to the opposition 22. This is a genuinely insane conversion rate. Something that began with this beautifully worked try, scored in the end by the blight of England himself, Hugh Jones. Honestly, who hates England more than a Scotsman with a Welsh name? This is a glorious line-out move that finds complicated ways to make something incredibly simple. At heart, it's an old-school 13 hits a great angle on a well-weighted pass off a line-out move like in days gone by, but against modern defences that requires a little more unpicking. Scotland stand Ritchie at the tail and deliberately overthrow the line-out, cutting out the need for all tired, throw someone up, pass it down to the scrum half, spin it out, all of that stuff that just gives the defence a trigger for when they can get in your face. Free Scottish backs then essentially replicate a two-wave attack or phase play. It's an increasing trend where the boot, this space behind the initial line, this kind of zone behind the forwards, boasts not just a distributor but also a crash option to run a hard line, to smash it up. And Scotland have that here. Tuipulotu runs an initial dummy line and also casually trips his man up. Here you are, look at that. Stopping England folding too far. But out the back are both Steyn, to crash up, and Russell, to distribute. This, combined with the lack of a uniform trigger for the charge, causes chaos for England. All three midfielders have completely different ideas on how to defend this Scottish attack. When it begins, Steyn would be Smith's man and Russell would be Farrell's, but Smith drifts onto Finn and Farrell decides, no, not drifts, smash, and flies up to kill him. Actual murder. Marchant has no idea what either are doing and just continues drifting on his, his own wavelength, and it allows Russell the time to time a perfect pass to Jones, hitting a hell of a line, leaving it late so he can cut to whatever option England take. He'd score, but for some fantastic anticipation from Ollie Hazel-Collins, who spies this might happen before Russell even throws the ball and starts tracking back, getting Jones to ground. But Steyn runs a fantastic support line and Scotland get up to the try line. England are massive numbers short on this side, with Hogg barking for the ball, so when Stewart gets back up to his feet off the ground, he sprints around to go and join Malins out wide. The winger has to make a tackle and it leaves Stewart covering the wing solo. Once Rugby's own M&M gets back up to his feet, Stewart comes in and has a word. He tells his winger, I've got this, you jog across and cover my position at fullback, you're the one in field, this is your job now, even giving him a tiny shove as Scotland carry in. However, Malins stands with his hands on his hips as they play one more phase, and that's all the time Scotland need to identify what's on, that he isn't there. White throws a slightly ropey pass and it actually aids Scotland. The English D is right up in their face, it's rushed up, and whilst Hazel-Collins is initially watching for the grubber, once he sees the ball has gone to Tuipulotu, not to Russell, he rushes up to join his colleagues. This is going to be a crash ball, except, wouldn't you know it, that big centre that they've picked is actually a skillful South Sea Islander, and he drops it onto the toe. Malins isn't chasing across until the kick is already in, despite Stewart's warning, meaning Jones has all the time in the world to chase, gather, and score. It's a lovely move of lovely patience, exploiting expectations and utilising how subtly skillful this Scottish team can be. Their kicking game went far beyond the attacking stabs and also into a proper lethal weapon the whole way through the match. One of the most interesting aspects about how England approached Saturday's game was in the way they deployed their kicking game and how Scotland were able to counter it. I think many expected Steve Borthwick's side to adopt a largely Leicester style of play with little bits, every now and again a flare coming from Nick Evans' Harlequins influence, but England on Saturday kicked like Harlequins. It's a tactic I talked about in my video on kicking last week, but it's kind of explained by these two examples. After a good carry here, Smith brings a forward onto the ball excellently, and with the gain line crossed and quick ball secured, Scotland are scrambling to cover the overlap generated. Hogg has no idea whether to stand up or drop back, and Smith slides in behind him. Russell does recover, but gets trapped at the bottom of the ruck, and this could so easily have been a turnover for England, a penalty on the 5-metre line. And then, some 10 or so minutes later, Smith thumps it long here and finds grass, in the hope the bounce will force the Scotch cover to rush their kick back, their return kick to him, as they have less time. And sure enough, it goes straight into Stewart's breadbasket, who runs it back. England have already made now a 20-metre net gain on where Smith first kicked the ball, but once they go right out to the other touchline, because of how Smith was kicking on the earlier dinks, such as the previous example, they're now lighter out wide, and Hogg is nowhere to be seen. He's standing right back, allowing Hassel-Collins to burst down the wing. England get quick ball, and Ludlam then makes a great carry, almost offloading to put Brandt straight through for what would have been certainly a try-scoring chance, if not a try itself. Harlequins kick the ball a lot in order to open up space and manipulate a defence. Again, I talked about it last week. And now England kick the same way. I find it incredibly interesting that Borthwick has clearly decided that the kicking falls under the remit of attack, not defence, as far as the coach devising the tactics around it is concerned. And frankly, I think it kind of explains a lot. England's attack looked pretty ready to rock and roll, but their defence, a few weeks into a new regime, would regularly split open because they weren't kicking in a manner that promoted it. With the added issue that, aside from Smith, these kicking tactics were brand new to England and virtually all of their players who don't play like this at club level. And it's totally unlike anything Eddie Jones was running last year, where Scotland have been playing a similar set of tactics for around 3 years. And they use this to pull them pretty far out of shape. The Nick Evans kicking strategy wants you to be kicking on the front foot whilst you're still going forward to cause maximum panic in a defence. But this is perhaps a slightly too literal example of kicking on the front foot from JVP. Hogg can easily cover, but the tactic does ultimately kind of work. His clearance is hurried, he doesn't have much time to aim, and Scotland have no time to set the defence, so Stewart can place a lovely bomb into this space that he spots for himself to chase. He almost recovers, which would have left Scotland really scrambling. That would have been a huge problem, but in the end they can set up and clear themselves next phase. But Stewart puts in another belting kick. This is a really good kick, splitting Hogg and Russell, getting England back on top in this kicking duel. Except Scotland have been doing this for years. They know England are on top, and Hogg makes one workmanlike master chess move. He thumps it long the opposite way, away from where Stewart and the best kickers are, and towards the debutant winger, who sees room in front of him. He sees it's only Hogg chasing his own kick, and instead of scanning the full field, just thinks, this is my time to have a crack at Twickenham, just like I've been dreaming about ever since I was a wee little posh boy. What he doesn't see, however, is any support around him, because there isn't any. Jones and Hogg follow up, and the fullback gets over the ball himself to win a turnover, pretty much exactly what he was hoping for. He was hoping Hassel-Collins would run this back, because it'll isolate him. This, meanwhile, is an incredibly even kicking duel. England arguably making more ground, but Scotland play it smarter. Once again, this kicking tactic is all about trying to disorganise the defence, rather than necessarily make yardage, and Scotland give us a masterclass. Because the English players are chasing their own kicks, the player marking this corner changes every time Scotland kick there, and there's nobody else really back to chase the kick here when Hassel-Collins, rather than Stewart, gets it. He hits it long. This is a really good kick though, and whilst Russell has loads of time to make this kick, he looks up and sees, because everyone else was in front of the kick, Hassel-Collins is alone in following up. He throws it wide to Van der Merwe, and not only does it force both English centres to commit to this side of the pitch, but it's also pulled Hassel-Collins so far out of position, because for a long time he was the only guy chasing, so he's followed it across, he's followed the play across. OHC makes the tackle, and in the meantime, Russell has set a pod of forwards for him to play out the back of and work it wide, because Collins having Hassel Duhan means that there's nobody on the far wing. Stein can step the retreating Ben Olds before linking up with Hogg, who then bombs the final pass, but it's still a hell of an exit from Euro 22. It's very good. It's always the way with Finn Russell when you watch him back. What at the time felt like a risky moment of maverick madness running it from his own 22 was in fact a calculated beat of utter genius, thinking a play ahead, knowing he can pull Hassel-Collins out of position and leave England backs completely out of their defensive shape. But look, let's be honest, right? That was far from the most notable, impressive Scottish counter-attack of the game. Sometimes, analysing a try like Duhan van der Merwe's feels a bit like letting daylight in upon magic. But in this particular case, the magic very much remains. After England clear, it's a classic counter-attack trick of scanning for your own players, not for gaps in the opposition defence. A few Scots put their hand up, but George Turner here, who had a brilliant game by the way, he was phenomenal, is wonderfully subtle. He just stops still. his shoulder in the way so Farrell can't get his near Duhan. Duhan targets this, he runs through. And from there, it genuinely is magic. Quite how a man built like the BT Tower on steroids can maneuver so magically around players is astonishing, but a second magic trick occurs when you look from this angle and keep your eye on which arm Dewey is holding the ball in. His transfer from one arm to the other so he can fend Don Brandt occurs as he's stepping Van Borthwick with a kind of subtlety you wouldn't think was possible from a guy who's probably only able to be killed by coastal erosion. And yet, nope. Duhan pulls it all out, destroying England so thoroughly you'd think he's the Conservative Party. Yet, despite the new regime rust and Scotland's experience and bullshit trickiness, we did see England's attack start to function, with Marcus Smith having one of his best games in a white shirt. Smith got rave reviews for his performance at Murrayfield last year, but the display on Saturday, right, was completely night and day better. I've just been back and watched Smith's performance from last year's game. He was so much better on Saturday. Not only was his kicking game infinitely improved, largely for the fact that he was playing with his more familiar Quins tactics, but over the last year he's developed an amazing patience and knack for knowing when to pull the trigger on his ever-shining golden gun. This attack begins with England ballsing up a clear two-phase tap move. Genge carries slightly sideways to tie in as many tacklers as possible. Then the move clearly is Don Brandt fold to the short side to draw a defender round and Curry charges straight. But Genge has gone too far sideways and Don Brandt keeps to his line. But Curry thinks the move's no longer on, so he tries to pull out until he sees Van Borthwick's given the pass. He fumbles it backwards. England are caught well behind the game line. Everything's a bit of a mess, but Smith is patient. He just lets his forward carry, totally disinterested until they have some actual forward momentum. Another phase, Farrell calls it out, but Toje takes it instead of passing it out, and it leaves England's options slightly diminished. So Smith plays a phase off 10, just calmly calls for the reset on the open side. England finally get a good carry, and they go wide. Now, this is a very interesting formation we'll come back to, but whilst Don Brandt gives the wrong pass, allowing White to drift, the two playmakers can still get it wide. Scotland's defence has started to compress now. Hogg is up in the main line, so Kyle Steyn begins to jog back into the backfield to cover for a chip or kick or anything of the sort, except Smith spots this, and he orders JVP, who's about to pass this way, to instead send a forward straight into him. He makes the tackle, England then play another phase to give them quicker ball to play off, and the moment it's fast enough, Steyn is still off his feet, Smith screams for two forwards to get in his way to buy him time. Similar to Tuipulotu, he wants the Scottish defence to get up in his face, and the ball coming through Sinclair's hands first allows him to do that. Hogg has only just dropped out to sweep across, and Van der Merwe is having to come up very flat, because most passes to a distributor in the boot means there's going to be another pass. Smith instead drops it on his own boot at the perfect moment. Malin's able to chase and finish unopposed. An amazing moment of attack management by Smith, knowing exactly when to pull the big play, and a brilliant finish by Max Malins. And whilst there's been a lot of mostly inane shit chatted about how Owen Farrell and Marcus Smith don't work as a combo, despite the pair being responsible for masterminding this, one of the greatest passages of unlocking a defence I've seen in my life, and arguably, almost actually unarguably, the most impressively constructed try of this World Cup cycle so far last autumn, Malin's second try can, if you dig in, really put that to bed once again, and we'll have to do this again next week as well, no doubt. England have the ball a few phases already, but similar to how I discussed the Wayne Pivac attack a few weeks ago, England's new attack appears to work best from an edge, from near the touchline, so Smith and Farrell get out towards that line to set up the attack. Scottish forwards set in on Sinclair here, one of their biggest carriers, whilst the rest stand off, so Farrell can call out the back and fires a pass to Don Brandt, trying to exploit the way WP Nell has stepped in on Sink moments earlier. Faz then entrusts Marcus to make the most of the momentum this generates, and England work the other way. This time Sinclair does carry, keeping England on their toes, and Ben Curry does something very sneaky. He nudges Gilchrist away from the ruck, forcing White to fill in on the fringe, and from way out here, Marchant spots this. He calls to Farrell, who times the pass perfectly for when White has committed to fire him over the gain line. And from here, it's a perfect demonstration of their new shape. Eddie Jones, before he had the audacity to point out that English rugby is far too focused around private schools, which it is, was attempting to pioneer a new positionless brand of rugby, which would see the traditional forward groups that make up the 1-3-3-1 type attacking shapes slide about, forwards taking on backs roles at a moment's notice. And what Borthwick and Evans seem to have done is really interesting, because England on Saturday played a very conventional 1-3-3-1 shape, the safest, oldest set shape the sport has, but adapted elements of Eddie's new Maverick system. Here, the free pod disassembles into a straight hands down the line old school move, similar to Scotland's first try. It's a fun, complicated way of playing very simple old school rugby against a top tier defence, and that's what England deployed off the back of Marchant's charge. England are set into their 1-3-3-1 shape, and traditionally Chesham charges here and Genge stays on this side to clean out. He just clears out the ruck whilst Don Brandt joins in, but instead this is kind of genius play. Genge slides round the back into the boot, despite being in the bonnet himself. This creates an extra man. Farrell could have got here, and is trying to, but it being Genge means Ritchie shoots in, expecting a hard carry. So when he ships it onto Stewart instead, who moments earlier was the guy actually in the boot here, it's a simple draw and give to put the edge forward, the 1 in the 1-3-3-1, Ludlam, into space. He can draw hog and put Malins over. It's an impossibly inventive, original, creative score that honestly I think is the first time we're seeing an attacking tactic that's about to change how teams play. A forward entering the boot of his own pod is a revolution that could triple the size of a rugby coach's phase play playbook if those coaches start to catch on quickly. This could happen by the World Cup. This could be a huge trend we're witnessing right here from Nick Evans' attack. All of it leads to a picture that, whilst obviously gutting that they lost, leaves England in honestly not a bad place. After rebooting everything from scratch for almost no reason at the new year, England were up against a side simply further along in their journey than them. If this was the first game of a World Cup cycle, we'd probably feel different, and if this was a game played at the end of this year's championship, rather than after just 13 days of Borthwick, Evans and Sinfield being in the jobs, they may just have held out, or we may have just felt very differently. And yet, on this particular day, they came up against an utterly inspired Scotland team. I haven't talked much about the defence, which was the main focus when I covered this result 2 years ago, but man, Scotland were ferocious the full game through. There wasn't a passage of genius game management we got from Russell similar to last year, but instead we just got the most resolute defence, despite the enormity of what they were doing. Never during that final passage did I ever think Scotland were going to concede. They had this growing English attack safely under wraps through some incredible heroic tackling and amazing organisation. The much hyped Hewitt-Pilotu combo was talked of for what they can do with the ball in hand, and we certainly saw that, but they were defensively exceptional. Hewitt-Pilotu in particular having come on enormously since a slightly jumpy showing in Cardiff last year to become a maestro of shutting stuff down. And then we have the forwards. Jamie Ritchie was stellar, but word has to go to Richie Gray, recalled into the team of proper for about the first time since he got a sensible haircut, the boring bastard, but he was outstanding. Minute to minute skill set, work rate, set piece focus, making a real difference for Scotland, including in the eventual winning score. Whilst those age-old DVDs of Gareth Edwards' greatest moments designed to be watched time and time again by father and son, mother and daughter, maybe long gone, this Six Nations you'll probably still hear a few things over and over again. Most notably, me screaming, "Kicking is how you open up space for running rugby," time and time again. Even if you don't watch my videos, I was probably just standing by your bins tomorrow night and just shrieking it. But here's the thing, and you will hear this by your bins again: kicking is how you open up space for running rugby. I think teams and fans frequently also overestimate the power of the mark as a deterrent, especially in the last 10 minutes of a close game. It can be a really useful weapon to hand over. We've seen the likes of Dan Bigger do this in the past, deliberately putting up a kick so the opposition can mark it, because when you're trying to run the clock down as it is because you've got a narrow lead, having them take 45 seconds over something instead of 5 is a pretty good tactic, especially when it leaves them inside their own 22 and will likely result in them kicking it back to you. And that's just what Ben Youngs tries to do here. Kyle Steyn catches it, and from an English perspective, a winger not known for his kicking, standing 8 metres from his own line, eating up a full minute and then about to give it back to you, not a bad thing. Except as Steyn hits it back, a few complications become clear. England initially kicked off a maul. This means all the forwards were grouped. They all chased the kick as a unit, as one unified group, because they were together moments ago for the maul. With the backs, who at the line-out occupied most of the field, they covered most of the space, together out wide. There's a separation of forwards and backs. Youngs hoists it high, but this kick is kinda nothing. If he hits it a bit longer, Russell calls the mark a la Steyn, and they waste some more time. If he hits it a bit shorter, Freddie Stewart can get under it and contest, potentially give England possession in the 22. As it is, George Horne runs a very sneaky line to slow Stewart, but never block him, and it makes it an easy catch for Finn. He can commit Stewart and free Kinghorn, a second playmaker, who looks up and spies Ezekwe out here is the furthest out forward, so one pass can take out more than half of the English defenders, including all of their pack. Farrell defends this very smartly, backtracking and trying to buy time for Vunipola and the gang to get over, never committing to anything, just as Hewitt-Pilotu doesn't himself. He keeps his options open. Kinghorn runs a superb support line, kinda inventing a boot where there isn't one, eventually getting the ball wide to Duhan. With the time Farrell was able to buy, the English forwards have managed to track across the field, except because the danger was over here, every English back bar left winger Watson, previously defending 70% of the field, are now spread across about 7 metres. This isn't even an exaggeration. Marchant here is the furthest out back bar the winger on the far side. George Horne has run a brilliant line off this break, getting ahead of the play by miles, meaning he's exactly where the ruck occurs, and he brings a forward onto the ball as Finn sets up the attack behind. but this also creates a beautiful new position to attack from. The English backs are still condensed on this side, and Scotland now only have about half of the forwards who travelled across as a group to attack, because the others are at the bottom of this rock. This leaves Itoje and Watson in the centre positions. Itoje's at 12, Watson at 13, with Youngs stepping in on the wing. Everyone horrendously out of position, and Russell threads a beautiful ball to send Dempsey right between the centres. Once again, Horn has got ahead of the play and it allows him to spin it immediately. The only English back tracking across, Marchant, stops to consider contesting, and that second is vital. If he gets across any sooner, Youngs only has to cover these two, but as it is, he has 3 players to watch, and Russell can wait and time the pass perfectly to get it outside him and put Stain away down the wing. And this is where things get really tricky. The tackle is made, but it puts Marchant, Youngs, Watson and Stewart, 4 of England's 7 backs, in useless positions over here. Smith has dropped out to fullback, reducing the number of backs to 2, and it means the England pack, who flooded across the entire field earlier, are stuck. Farrell defends at 10, but Mako Vinopola, a 32-year-old loosehead with a 34-year-old face, is having to operate as both centres. Scotland's skills throughout this move are phenomenal, but one of the most impressive aspects is their support play. This sequence is entirely off the cuff. Russell rarely has time to call anything but, a pod of forwards every now and again in front of him, or the odd screen runner around him, but the dummy lines are consistently exceptional by Scottish players just picking them on the fly, just knowing instinctively how to play attacking rugby even when they don't necessarily have the ball or aren't getting it. It continues once Tuipulotu picks up the ball at 9. These two forwards run great lines which holds everyone inside Dan Cole, and Russell lets the balding baked potato creep up on him before throwing the ball wide to replacement hooker Fraser Brown. And this is where everything Scotland have done well all game comes to an absolute head. Instead of worrying about Vinopola, who's never going to get out wide, he's never reaching the winger, Brown squares up to fix Farrell, the actual threat. Faz is forced to give him a shove as he unleashes a really quality wide ball to Richie Gray, perfectly selected, the ideal ball he could have thrown. Blair Kinghorn picks his line superbly. If he's on the outside of Gray here, Malins can afford to drift, backtrack to try and buy time for Farrell to get across, similar to how his captain had done for the forwards a few steps earlier, because Gray can only pass to players on this side of him, so Malins only has to watch that. But instead, with choices all around, his best option is to shoot up. This is the correct decision for Malins, and Richie Gray delivers an absolutely beautiful pass. He catches, draws and gives in spectacular fashion. It's perfect, unbelievable stuff, especially with this kind of pressure on him. And Fagerson wisely doesn't try to do too much himself. He just changes the point of focus and gets it out to the true danger man. There's been a call around the Squid Rugby office for a while here that we should drop the Van der Merwe and just call him Duhan, like a Brazilian footballer. And if ever there was a finish to make him worthy of that specific title, this was it. All 15 Scots have played their part in this try. Every single player has shown their worth, value, expertise executed for their teammates. And all of it to get the ball into Duhan's bizarrely leg-like arms. The pace is amazing. The step, exceptional, beats 2 men at once. And the power to ride the tackle and make sure, this is really impressive, his ball-carrying arm is free despite Don Brandt's best efforts is unbelievable and allows him to stretch out and conquer Twickenham. Because whilst the death of DVDs might mean this clip won't end up on repeat at houses from the brink of the border upwards forevermore, moments like these were never really built for when we press play on our DVD remote. Duhan's unbelievable double to win the Calcutta Cup is a moment that should primarily exist, not on physical media, but in folklore. Because try though Twitter might, there is no replacement for the hairs on the back of the neck feeling as one fan remembers on a cold walk home alone at night in a few weeks' time, or rush shower before work a decade away, how they felt as that ball went over. Saturday gave us the most iconic try rugby has seen since the last World Cup final. It gave us a day that no amount of daylight or moonshine can ever stop from being magic. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. There's also a video on Ireland Wales. Please go and see that. I didn't get to cover Italy v France just for time reasons. You only get a week and it takes enough work to get this done in this much detail. So I hope you enjoyed it. Back for round 2 next week. There's also a podcast if you want to listen to that. A crossover with the Blood and Mud podcast looking at England against South Africa from the 2010 World Cup. Not the final, the one in the pool stage that finished 36-0. Went into that in great detail. There's plenty more, covering different games around. All of that, have a look round, and I'll see you very soon for more rugby.
International rugby union teams at